Thank you, Tom, for that introduction. As we've heard throughout the day, the pace at which the cyber threat changes are happening really demands our constant vigilance. So I want to thank you, Tom, for continuing to provide us all the opportunity to keep this important conversation alive. And I'm really thankful to everyone here today for your effort in advancing cybersecurity for our nation and for the world. I am both pleased and honored to introduce our next speaker. In his role as the Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator, Michael Daniel advises our nation's leaders and leads the development and implementation of our national cybersecurity strategy and policy. His tireless efforts and unmatched commitment have earned him the nickname of White House Cyber Czar. Like all of you, I appreciate and respect the frankness in which Michael speaks about the cyber threat and the need for each of us, public, private, international, to work together in a harmonized ecosystem to rapidly bring capability to this fight. Easier said than done, as Michael highlighted at a recent cyber coordination discussion. He pointed out the challenge that none of the significant cyber incidents that we've had to deal with have been exactly the same. But with his continued leadership and perseverance, we will be better poised, better prepared, and better coordinated for the inevitable. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Michael Daniel.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be back here at the Billington CyberSecurity Summit to talk to you and give you a view of how the administration is thinking about the cybersecurity threat and how our work is continuing to evolve in this area. You know, I've been in this position now almost 4.5 years, and I was at OMB for 17 years before that. And over that period of time, I've really watched cybersecurity evolve from a niche focus of concern by the intelligence agencies and the cyber geeks into a true national level challenge. This is a challenge that is now shared by everyone, even those that think that they never go online. It is still a challenge even for them because of the interconnected world in which we live. And it's a challenge that in policy terms has actually emerged extremely fast and then changed very rapidly and continues to evolve at a pace that is difficult for any organization to cope with, let alone government. If you think back to when President Obama was campaigning for his first term 8 years ago, we were on iPhone 1. Twitter was just reaching scale. Bitcoin was a paper. Literally a research paper. Instagram, still an idea in Kevin Systrom's and Mike Krieger's heads. And so if you fast forward to today, the so-called Internet of Things is really beginning to take off. And we can foresee a world in which your toaster, your refrigerator, and your car, and your Fitbit are all potential threat vectors. Cyberspace, you know, a human creation, it's growing by 5.5 million devices per day. And by 2020, we estimate that there'll be more than 25 billion connected devices in the world. And the number of users is up too, from 1.6 billion in 2008 to more than 3.4 billion today. Other technologies on the horizon also pose a promise and a threat, including artificial intelligence and machine learning, which could power both better offense and some better defenses. So this cyber threat, as I've talked about a lot, is continuing to become broader, more prevalent, and more dangerous. Broader because of the statistics I just cited. By adding all of those devices and users, we're making the attack surface bigger. But these same trends are also making cyberspace more heterogeneous, because defending a car is going to be very different than defending a wired desktop sitting in an office, making our job on the cyber defense that much more complicated. The threat is also becoming more prevalent because more and more malicious actors have discovered that they can use cyberspace and the internet as an effective tool to pursue their goals. These groups range from criminal organizations out to make money, to hacktivists looking to promote their causes, to terrorists seeking to recruit and radicalize, and nation states to exercise power and protect what they see as their national interests. And finally, it's becoming more dangerous, with various actors from terrorists and hacktivists to nation states such as Iran and North Korea being more and more willing to carry out destructive and disruptive attacks through cyberspace. And we are convinced that other groups and countries will follow suit. Now, that's a pretty grim picture, and I am sometimes referred to as the little bluebird of happiness on the NSC for the usual presentations that I do at our staff meetings. But I do fundamentally believe that we have to reject fatalism about this problem. It is not insoluble. It is really hard, and I don't want to minimize the challenge. But we don't simply have to throw up our hands and forego the benefits of a wired world. But we do have to be determined and methodical in our response and recognize that it will take many years of hard collaborative work and creative thinking to tackle our cyber challenges. So from this administration's point of view, over the last 7.5 years, we've pursued a three-pronged approach to tackling these challenges. How is it that we raise our cybersecurity in both the public and the private sector? And how do we do that in both the short and the long term? How do we disrupt, deter, and irritate, interrupt the malicious cyber actors from doing what they want to do? And then because we know those first two things are going to fail some of the time, how do we actually get better at responding to, recovering from, and being able to be resilient to cyber incidents when they inevitably occur? Now, we've memorialized this approach in the President's Cybersecurity National Action Plan, or because we're Washington, we have to have an acronym, so we call that the CNAP, launched this past February. It's nearly 50 initiatives that are rolled up underneath the CNAP, chart a clear path forward for addressing these challenges. So let me tell you a little bit about how we're seeing those. In terms of raising our cyber defenses, this is really about how we do this in partnership both inside the government and raise our defenses there, but also in partnership with industry, with state and local governments, and with our international partners. We've made great strides in this area over the last few years. We've established a robust policy framework of executive orders and strategic plans. We've updated OMB guidance and memorandum to guide the defensive efforts. We partnered with industry to develop the National Cybersecurity Framework, or the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. We've even managed to get Congress to work with Congress to pass bipartisan legislation that the President could sign. Who knew that such things actually still happened on the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. And we've followed up with policy guidelines on, that were called for in that bill on how to share information with the government in accordance with that act. Within the government, we continue to invest in the capabilities to raise cybersecurity, and we're deploying capabilities more broadly across all parts of the government. And we are also looking towards the future and tackling the issues of things like legacy IT in the government. By proposing to Congress that we create a $3.1 billion information technology modernization fund. But of course, as I mentioned, making our defenses stronger simply isn't enough. We also have to effectively use all of the available tools to deter, disrupt, and constrain malicious actors targeting us in cyberspace. And to this end, we've sought to apply the lessons that we've learned from our counterterrorism efforts. And one of the key lessons here has been the importance of creating muscle memory between federal agencies. So that's why we've taken steps like creating the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, or CTIC, to bring together that cyber intelligence to facilitate our actions in cyberspace the same way that NCTC does for counterterrorism activities. We are investing heavily in our capabilities to do attribution and enable us to identify who is behind what's happening to us in cyberspace. We've established a robust policy framework to guide and support our disruption efforts. In particular, the President issued Presidential Policy Directive 20 on cyberspace operations to govern how we engage in operations designed to create effects in cyberspace. And we've begun to integrate steadily our cyber capabilities into our broader foreign policy and into our toolkit for combating our adversaries. Whether it's combating ISIL or other threats, combatant commanders can now utilize cyber capabilities in their approaches to engaging our adversaries. We obviously also want to consider how to use all of the available tools to deter action in cyberspace, particularly states and non-state actors from undertaking a broad range of malicious cyber activity that poses a significant threat to the national economy or our national security of the United States. And that's been our policy since 2011. And we pursue this policy of deterrence through both denial and cost imposition. We seek to deny potential actors the benefit of malicious cyber activity by raising our defenses and improving our resilience. And we also are working to be able to impose costs on those who carry out malicious cyber activities, whether through law enforcement action, economic sanctions, technical cyber operations, or if necessary, physical force. To support these deterrence efforts with appropriate capabilities, the President has also issued an executive order authorizing the Treasury Secretary to impose sanctions on malicious cyber actors who target government or critical infrastructure systems. And this provides us an additional tool for reaching actors when other traditional means are not available. We also, of course, are seeking stability in cyberspace, something that goes beyond deterrence. And in here, we have tried to apply three sort of key elements. One, affirming that international law applies to state behavior in cyberspace. Pursuing broad adoption of voluntary peacetime norms of state behavior. And implementation of practical confidence-building measures among states, which reduces the risk of misperception and escalation. And although we were the first to articulate that cyber activities could constitute an armed attack, over time, we have persuaded other countries to agree with us. For example, the applicability of international law was noted in a 2015 report of the UN Group of Governmental Experts on Information Security, and was more recently affirmed by our G7 partners at the Leader Summit in May, and even by the G20 last fall. And we continue to work to promote those norms of behavior that I was mentioning, the idea that states should not disrupt or destroy critical infrastructure during peacetime, use their intelligence capabilities to steal intellectual property for commercial gain, or interfere with the ability of computer incident response teams from carrying out their defensive responsibilities. We've also argued that states have an affirmative duty to help mitigate malicious cyber activity emanating from their territory. And finally, we are developing confidence-building measures to slow escalation and provide a way to cool down conflicts. We've established hotlines between both Russia and between Moscow and Washington, and between Beijing and Washington. And we're in the process of supporting adoption of measures in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to enhance transparency, predictability, and stability among member states. But of course, as I mentioned, sometimes despite our efforts at raising our defenses and despite our efforts to disrupt what the bad guys are going to do, we will face significant cyber incidents. We've seen this, I've lived it, from the attack on Sony Pictures Entertainment, to the intrusion into OPM, to the attack on the Ukrainian power grid last December. And that is why we focused in this third area for improving our ability to respond to and recover from cyber incidents. And this past July, the President released Presidential Policy Directive number 41 on that establishes how the federal government will respond to a significant cyber incident. Now, this policy establishes clear principles such as shared responsibility, that everyone has a role to play in this, that our response would be based on an assessment of the level of risk created by the incident, that we're going to have a unified response and coordinated response from the government, that we're going to safeguard the victim's sensitive information, and that our response will facilitate restoration and recovery. The PPD also focuses the government's activities into 3 specific lines of effort and designates a lead agency for each area. It specifies that the Department of Justice, acting through the FBI, will take the lead for responding to the immediate threat, and that includes the investigation, attribution, and ultimately trying to bring the perpetrators to justice. DHS will take the lead when it comes to organizing our efforts to deal with the impact of the malicious cyber activity on the assets. We call that the asset response. In other words, how do we deal with the effect on the thing that was impacted? And then the Office of Director of National Intelligence, operating through the CTIC, will be responsible for providing intelligence and other analysis about the threat and identifying opportunities to mitigate and disrupt it. Now, the policy document also acknowledges that there's a fourth line of effort out there that is probably the most important one to the victim, and that's what I call business operations response. That is, how do you actually restore operations and get back online if you've been impacted by one of these significant cyber incidents. And the policy that we've laid out makes clear that we recognize that the importance of that line of effort for the victim, and we will coordinate with the victim to minimize any interference between their incident response activities and our own. So this policy document, we're deep into the implementation of it, and of course, as with any policy document, you know, any presidential policy document is not complete without a long list of tasks at the back of it, and we are working very hard to get to all of those tasks and get them done before this administration leaves office. So just in conclusion, I would say that, you know, when this administration came in, you know, we were still identifying cybersecurity as a policy domain. And really what we've seen over the last 8 years is the emergence of this area as a full and rich policy domain on its own. But what makes it so interesting, I think, is that it is, while it is its own domain of policy and its own area of interest, at the same time it cuts across a whole bunch of other areas and remains deeply embedded in our geopolitical relations with other nation states, with our counterterrorism activities, with our economic policy. And you cannot separate those two. It's kind of like the nature of the internet. It flows over and across all the different boundaries. So we are looking very much forward to the transition and ensuring that the next administration can take advantage of all the lessons that we have learned and build upon the foundation that we have laid here to keep moving forward. Because one thing I am convinced of is that this challenge is only going to grow more intense over time, but it is one that if we work together between government and industry, between government and our partners around the world, it is one that we can manage and that we can tackle. So thank you very much for letting me come and speak with you here today. I really appreciate it.